Welcome to Living Outside the Matrix, the show where we examine important issues either ignored or misrepresented in the mainstream narrative. My name is Nigel Howitt, I'm your host, and on the show today it's a great pleasure to welcome MCToon from Minnesota over there in the USA. And we're going to have a great conversation, I'm sure, and in the midst of it all, we're going to bust a few incorrect claims, I think we could call it, or false information that was put to me by Mark Steele. I've interviewed Mark Steele on 5G as a weapon, or on his claim that it's a weapon, a couple of times. And Michael has very helpfully pointed out to me in emails that there are one or two errors. So, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today, mate, and a very warm welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I noticed on one of your platforms saying that you're an empirical sort of evidence-based kind of person. So I am too. So that's quite. I know we'll have a discussion where we're on the same wavelength. So, yeah. What led you into this whole thing with Mark Steele 5G as a weapon? What was your sort of lead-in? What was the hook that got you in there, Michael?
I've spent a couple years challenging flat earthers on their claims about flat Earth. And it was one flat earther that had mirrored a video by Mark Steele where he talked about this antenna that's on top of streetlights in Gateshead, where Mark lives. And with I have some education in electrical engineering, and I watched that and I was just in awe of how wrong he was on everything. So that's what led me into Mark Steele. I had been interested in some of the false claims about 5G, but Mark Steele's false claims about 5G really skyrocket to the peak of Mount Stupid, if you will. So what I did is I commented on a video of his, and he deleted my comment. It wasn't a rude comment. I just said, hey, that's not what that antenna is. And why would he do that? I can cite my information, and I thought it was really a strange thing to do, and I tried to interact a little more, and then he starts making accusations about things that I might do with underage people. Like, where did that come from? It has nothing to do with our conversation, and you had to go there. It was a very strange thing, and so I start looking into it more. And I see he has a history of that. He doesn't like anybody challenging him, especially people that are qualified. Now, there are certainly people much more qualified than me that he has blocked and made the same accusations about. And I started connecting with a few of them. And so I've built some friendships with different people that have been kind of blocked by Mark Steele.
Yeah.
We kind of get a chuckle out of watching his ramblings and about how wrong he can be about things. So I did a few videos addressing his claims. I even was happy to have him on to debate me once about a year ago. And it was a drastic failure for him. He had no, he cited two papers that were both retracted. And that was it. He makes claims, and none of them are true. And so I can go over some of these if you want to just kind of give a rough idea of how wrong he is.
Absolutely.
So I have he points out this antenna, and I have one of them right here. This is the actual antenna that he claims is a dielectric lens antenna, high gain dielectric lens, and he says this little blob of stuff at the top is the lens, which is wrong. It's just there's a varnish. They protect it because it's meant to be outside, so it needs some protection from the elements. But a dielectric lens antenna needs to be at least one wavelength in size, preferably bigger. So this is an 868 megahertz antenna, and one wavelength is 13.6 inches. So the smallest lens that you could have that's a dielectric lens for this would be 13.6 inches, and it would not be very efficient. Well, that little drip isn't 13 inches.
Can I interrupt you and just quiz you there for a moment?
Yeah.
Is there something on that piece of kit that demonstrates or that shows you what frequency it's emitting at, so you can?
Yeah, there's a stamp on the back of the fiberglass board that says 868 or 869. They're very close. So yeah, it is. And then a friend of mine took this apart, and there's actually a software-defined radio on here. They're certified for a certain range, not certified, but they function in a certain frequency range. So 868 is the range.
Yeah.
This was there's a 915 megahertz version of it that's certified in the United States. So the FCC has all the documentation on it. So I referred to that. But it gets worse than that, of course, for Mark. He says that this looks like a dipole antenna, but a dipole antenna is half of the wavelength.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be 6.8 inches. He says it looks like a 6.8 inch antenna, but if you measure it, it's not 6.8 inches. It's about 3.4 inches, which makes sense because it actually is a monopole antenna. Now, Mark doesn't even know what a monopole antenna is, because in some of his interviews, he says a monopole is a stick that you put an antenna on. But if you ever took an antennas class, the first day of antennas class, you would cover a monopole antenna, which is what this is. It's the right length for a quarter wave monopole antenna.
Okay.
So he clearly hasn't had the first day of training in what an antenna design looks like.
It does raise important questions, doesn't it? Because when I first came across his claims, 5G as a weapon, around about 2 years ago, I think it was. It's a claim that sort of resonated with a lot of people who were concerned about EMFs, and I'm one of those, Michael. I've looked into the biological effects of electromagnetic fields in some length, and I don't claim to be an expert, but I look into these things to the degree to satisfy myself with respect to my own use of such devices. Are they safe for me to use? And I have been convinced of the harm of electromagnetic fields in terms of their effect on voltage-gated calcium channels in our biology, and the consequent damage to our bodies at a cellular level, and the harm to our mitochondria. So this was my come from. And I was very curious, because at the time over here in the UK, all of the street lamps are being replaced with these, ones that we've seen in his videos that I think you've already showed. I've seen on one of yours when he gets this street lamp top piece out. It's about so big, and it's got this area on the top. And all up and down the UK, they're refitting these things. And Mark's telling us that it's a weapon system. It's a kind of a dramatic story. And I must admit, I couldn't quite grasp how this could be a weapon system. So you've already told us that this component that he alleges is a weapon is in fact not what he says it in at all. So clearly his story is on shaky ground already. Can you illustrate maybe some of the broader fundamentals of his claims, or indeed any other aspects of his claims that are just nonsense, that are just incorrect?
Sure. He when you interviewed him, he talked about millivolts, and you asked him about millivolts per meter squared. Now, he just said millivolts as far as when he's reading it on his meter. Mm-hmm. But that's millivolts isn't a unit that the meters read. They mean millivolts per meter. Now, you asked, I love this. You asked per meter squared. And he said, oh, yes, per meter squared. Well, an expert, not you, I think knew more than he did, because you got it right. Millivolts are measured in millivolts per meter, not per meter squared. And he said, oh, yeah, per meter squared. But an expert would not make this mistake.
Yeah.
But for the most part, radio transmission is measured in watts per unit area, not volts per unit area, because at high frequencies, which is what most cell phones are, high frequencies, it's very difficult to make equipment to measure the actual voltage, so they use a wattage measure instead.
Is that because the voltages are so small, or effectively?
Yeah, at high frequencies, the voltage is changing at a high rate.
Okay,
so
gotcha, yeah. It's
the wattage that is what you measure instead of the voltage.
In fact,
the safety regulations for the limits stop at volts per meter at a certain frequency. In the United States, it's the FCC is 800 or to 2000. That's 2000 megahertz in the US. sorry, the UK, that's the ICNRP, stops there. So anything above 2 gigahertz, there is actually no volt per meter regulation. It's all watt per meter. And in the US, it's a little lower number. But either way, it cuts off because the measuring devices don't function at that very well. So rather than make an expensive, really difficult instrument, they make one that's better and more accurate.
Yeah.
Now he has, and the way that he claimed that these particular things were too powerful was he had his meter. I don't know if you've seen it. It's this orange meter with a sphere at the top.
Yes.
And he went into a room in his house or somebody's house and said, look, it's too high. But the problem with that meter is that it doesn't tell you the frequency. So to know, he can't know that it was 868 megahertz. It could have been anything. It could have been the mains power in the house. It could have been a cell phone charger. It could have been a television, a speaker, anything. You don't know. So he couldn't have identified because he didn't have the right equipment to identify because it's not based on frequency. So he would need a multimeter, a spectrum analyzer to do that, which he didn't have. What else? So yeah, it's a 25 milliwatt radio. Now he says, and this is again, it shows that he doesn't understand. He says, well, 1 milliwatt is all that you can have for human exposure. And it's actually less than, as based on the frequency. At 868 megahertz, it's closer to 0.6 milliwatts per centimeter squared. So again, he didn't get the units correct. But because it's an antenna, it drops off with distance. And he doesn't know how to do any of that stuff. You'd analyze it using an EIRP or ERP analysis. And this particular antenna at 1.1 centimeter is below the legal limit. So just over 1 centimeter away, it's safe for human usage.
Okay, because I mean, maybe you can correct me on the technical side of things for listeners, but anything being emitted from an antenna, it rapidly loses power as it goes out, doesn't it? Is it by the cube or the square? I can't remember now how it went. The square
is the foundation is inverse square, but there's no antenna that's perfect radiator for that. So it's actually slightly better than inverse square. This is they call it an omnidirectional, but it's not actually. It emits in kind of a donut shape. It doesn't do much up or down. So it's a little better than inverse square, but not a lot. This is not a very. It's not directional. He claims it's directional.
Yeah, that was maybe we can go into that as well, the directional. But initially, simply the power output isn't really a threat to anyone. Is that what you're pointing out to us? Is that the correction we should take out?
Yeah, it's 25 milliwatt. A cell phone tower is 50 watt to 100 watt typically, and like that would be a small one. So a whole different thing, and we can talk about how that works too. So of anything to be concerned about, and I'm with you on the concerns. It's a valid thing to be concerned about. This type of antenna is the least of your concerns. If you're going to be concerned, absolutely be concerned about the actual 5G antenna that you can get your analysis on. But he never talks about that. He doesn't really understand these things.
No, I mean, I was curious about that, Michael. I wanted to sort of steer the conversation that way, but we never quite did. Perhaps for obvious reasons. One of the things that he was telling me about was, you alluded to a minute ago there, this sort of directional capability, and the implication was, he never really spelled it out, but the implication was that somehow, we could be homed in on and targeted in some way. And of course, that just sows a scary thought in the minds of people because we don't know what way or how it could happen. But that was the sort of implication that I was left with. Can you address that and maybe illustrate why that's not really likely to happen? We can't, by anything that's placed in street lamps, at least.
So the way to have a higher gain, that's where one antenna will have more output, is to make it directional. So if you've seen a satellite dish or just any type of dish, it bounces it off the dish and that aims it in a certain direction. And that's how you get more focus, more aim, or higher gain is the technical term. An omnidirectional antenna does it in all directions in a donut, like I said. So he wants to suggest that it's directional somehow, but if it is directional, then how do you steer it? You can't steer it if it's fixed in a light post, and if it were directional, which is not, it would only go one way, and it wouldn't be able to target you. So he's actually defeated himself in his made up story here, because an omnidirectional antenna could potentially do it if you had the actual technology behind it. So it's called a phased array is what he's getting at. And he's claiming that all 31,000 antennas in the city of Gateshead are part of a phased array without any evidence to support this. But these things are hypothetically possible. You'd need nanosecond timing on all of the antennas in all these different it's so funny, it's so ridiculous. You'd have to have nanosecond timing accuracy in every single antenna to actually do something. And so what you do is it's called constructive interference. So if imagine throwing two rocks into a pond at the same time and the waves go out. On the far end of the pond, the waves will meet at one point and they'll be higher. Yeah. And they'll meet at another point and they'll cancel each other out and it'll be lower. That's what's happening with a phased array antenna. And 2 works, 3 works, 5, 10 works, but 1,000 works even better. If anybody has a Wi-Fi access point with more than one antenna, they're usually the very same thing. So he's claiming that all of them in Gateshead somehow are linked together, but he doesn't provide any reason why he thinks that. He doesn't show any of the engineering behind how it would have happened. And he also defeated himself by claiming it was a directional antenna. So the problem is that even if you had every single antenna inside Gateshead, just a few meters from your house, all of them added together would still be within the allowed limits, all 31,000, because they're such weak antennas.
Okay.
But it would take some analysis on his part, which I've never seen him do.
No, he's been big on claims, but I've heard it come from a few other people that it was worth questioning some of these claims. So it's great to have you to shed the sort of counter argument, if you like, some light on the other side of things. And I remember another thing that he was talking about was the sub-gigahertz frequencies and how they could penetrate through walls or something, and again, there was a sort of an implication of causing serious harm. I don't know if he used the term "kill you" on that particular with that particular incident or that particular example, as he has used on others. But the implication anyway was that these things can come through your house and target you, and and again, I was at a loss to understand why. So do you know anything about those particular claims? Can you shed any light on those?
Oh yeah, he has claimed that it can vaporize people, literally turn them and turn them to dust. And he says that to remove any question of whether or not he thinks that vaporizes the right, he says then you don't have to bury the body. So he really thinks that a human body will turn to dust through these things. Again, none of the power analysis works. You'd need, in order to get enough to actually turn a human into vapor, you'd need, one of the biggest power plants in the world to run at you for quite a while. It's not easy to do.
Sure. Maybe I'm interrupting because I haven't given you enough time to fully answer that question. But some people might be thinking, what about the KGB and alleged stories of various, maybe firing microwaves, embassies being targeted, diplomats? Should we be careful here not to throw the baby out with the bathwater and sort of eliminate the possibility in people's minds entirely of focused electromagnetic weapons? Because I'm just kind of playing a bit of devil's advocate here. So there's a little bit of that sounds credible. I'm not suggesting people can be vaporized, of course, but so maybe I should allow you to finish answering that question before I head you down but what do you think about that? So sorry.
Okay. So the radar, he's right. The lower frequency can penetrate farther. So 868 megahertz versus 2.4 gigahertz that your Wi-Fi and Bluetooth uses versus 3 gigahertz that some of the newer cell phones use. It does penetrate more, but he didn't establish how any of that would work. Normally, radar, if you've seen it, it's on a dish that's rotating. Well, this isn't rotating, and it's not nearly big enough and doesn't have the power of a dish, like on a ship or at the airport. So none of that makes sense. He didn't provide a plausible explanation for that. So it's up to him to support that claim. So to the claim of, or the concern about things like the embassies, it's an absolutely valid concern, and any of those things are very high power, though, definitely over any legal limit. So both in I think Cuba and an embassy in Russia, they had concerns about that it was potentially high power microwave radiation that was being aimed at them. For what reason? To harm them, maybe, or to trigger there's some speculation that it might have been to trigger some sort of a listening device that was maybe planted in. There's a lot of ambiguity about it. But yes, when high power microwave radiation is targeted at somebody, it's a big concern. So but that none of that is suggested to be low power, which is what's allowed.
So to make a clear distinction then, if I may interrupt you again, what people have been led to believe, if they've been following Mark Steele and his claims, is that, you know, on ordinary lampposts up and down the British Isles, and indeed probably in other countries too, you know, the state is getting ready to sort of take us all on with a weapon system. So that is clearly been rubbished. But allow me to say, sort of slightly playing devil's advocate, where do you stand on the general concern of not only, well, yeah, we've opened the door now on those sorts of weapons, haven't we? Weapons that could be used by the state, and as concerned citizens and freedom lovers, we should rightly be concerned about, you know, their legitimate use. Do you think that there are such weapons, in a nutshell, I suppose is what I'm asking you?
The capability is there for sure.
Okay.
I don't doubt that, and I wouldn't trust any particular government to not have developed things. In fact, I would expect any government to always be looking into weapons and defending themselves against weapons. So, do those things exist? Probably. In fact, the radar dish on any nuclear ship that's a powerful one could be aimed at people, and it would be very, very dangerous for them. The thing is, these things require a lot of power, so you need to feed it with a lot of power. So a nuclear ship has the power to do that, you know, but when you're sending it down to the lamppost, or to more likely, the lamppost is ridiculous, but to like your cell phone tower, there isn't enough power there, and there isn't a way to steer it like a radar dish does, right? Where you actually focus it. And phased array doesn't actually increase any. There's no magic to a phased array. It's not actually steering it like a dish does. So it doesn't give any magical properties to it. The laws of physics still apply all the same.
Gotcha. So I suppose to sort of just translate this into terms people can understand, this means really that there's no danger of, you know, you being zapped as you walk down the street or in your home, in terms of getting like an acute injury. You know, it's not like dangerous in the sense that it's going to burn you, fry you, kill you in anything like an immediate sense. But then again, on the flip side of it, from my come from with EMFs, with cell phone use, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and all these sorts of things, there's clearly an insipid, long-term, chronic, harmful effect. I mean, personally, I'm convinced of that. This isn't the time or place for me to present that case. People would have seen me talk about that elsewhere. But there's definitely a harmful effect, isn't there, with regards to these electromagnetic fields and devices and antennas. But we can rest assured that it's not in terms of acute attack and harming in the short term in the way that Mark Steele calls it a weapons system. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. But I'll give you a caveat here. These things are possible, but you'd know about it because they have to be big. So if you've seen the active denial system, ADS, it's brought up a lot. And it's a 96 gigahertz, 100,000 watts thing. It's a truck. It's a giant panel on the top, and and it's for crowd control. Okay. I don't know if you've seen the videos on that.
No, I haven't. No.
So it's interesting, and it's super powerful, 100,000 watts, right? A very, very powerful cell phone antenna might be 500 watts. So it's not even in the same neighborhood of power.
Yeah.
And the people that the crowd control usage of it, the people that it is aimed at, they feel hot tingling on their skin. So you don't want to be there, but it's not the kind of thing where somebody would be walking down the street and then they would zap them or somehow cause some harm.
Yeah.
And of course, anything that powerful you can measure with a meter.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's quite reassuring to find that it's reassuring in a sense to know that we needn't panic to that extent that Mark Steele would have had us all been panicking over the last couple of years. But, obviously there are plenty of things to be concerned about these days for free-loving individuals, freedom-loving, I should say. And as I've already stated, I am concerned about the use of 5G. It's obviously been speculated. Has it been linked with the alleged health scenario that's buzzing around the globe? To me, I mean, I said I'm satisfied that it's harmful anyway. So I was intrigued to learn about the 60 gigahertz frequency and the effect that it has on oxygen bonds, for example. I mean, that was very intriguing. And
yeah.
Can you tell us something about that?
So first of all, 5G doesn't use 60 gigahertz. It actually can't because 60 gigahertz in most countries is an unlicensed band. So you wouldn't want to use an unlicensed band because you don't know that somebody else might not interfere with your phone call. So reliability would be a problem. So people have said that it somehow affects the oxygen molecule in a way that will prevent it from binding with hemoglobin. And that's completely untrue. Oxygen in the air is dioxygen. It's two oxygens together, and it's in what's called the triplet state. And in the triplet state, there's two electrons that are the highest level electrons, and their spin is in a particular state governed by the Pauli exclusion principle. So I don't want to get too much into it. You can I can if on my website MCToon.net/60 gigahertz 60 GHz. Yep. I have a whole bunch of papers linked on there.
Great. Well, let me link to that below.
It absorbs the photon and it flips the spin, but it doesn't change the chemical bonding properties of oxygen. That takes a significantly larger amount of energy to do that.
Okay. I mean, I don't claim to be an expert, but I've seen a few graphs and seen a few, suggestions referencing other things, and it looked credible to me. I mean, this illustrates an important principle for all of us people out here trying to work out what's real and what isn't, and what's true and what's not. We can't be too careful on the things that we hear, and we always have to really verify things quite thoroughly, don't we? This is really the take-home point from what you're telling us here, Michael, which is great. But I had got the impression that there was certainly something around this, particular frequency, 60 gigahertz, and as you say, an ability it affects hemoglobin's ability to transport oxygen, and this was associated potentially with people dropping dead in Wuhan and other places. So it's very easy to get sort of lost in the hype and stuff, isn't it? Yeah. Can you tell us, if you know, what sort of frequencies are in the pipeline for 5G? I understand it's a whole range of frequencies, and I haven't been able to find anything seeing them going up as high as 60 gigahertz, interestingly enough. Yeah. But what can you tell us about the frequencies they either use or claim to use or will use?
Yeah, so in the UK and all of Europe right now, unless things have changed recently, there is no higher frequency bands in use yet for 5G at all. So that means that it's up to 3.5 gigahertz is the highest that's in use for the most part in the United States, and I probably China, but China doesn't document a lot of it. There's a little broader range in the lower frequencies. It goes up to about 6 gigahertz. And then there are 2 frequency bands that have been allocated and are in use in the United States, 26 gigahertz and 41 gigahertz, right around there. And those are less than 60, and they're licensed. So Verizon, I think, has the 41 gigahertz, and nobody else can use that particular frequency band except for them. They pay money so that they can be the only ones, so that your cell phone doesn't get interference with somebody else's network. So that's what's in use in the United States. Pretty much the rest of the world, they're not using these higher frequencies yet because there's just a lot of infrastructure you have to build, and it's a lot cheaper to just use your existing infrastructure and do some software modifications or whatever. And also the bands tend to be pretty expensive. The different governing bodies in the UK, it's Ofcom. Mm-hmm. When you want to go buy a certain frequency band, you're going to pay a lot of money. So whoever, O2, I think, I don't know your companies there so much.
O2 is one of them for sure.
Yeah, so they have to pay Ofcom a whole bunch of money for this, and they're like, well, we don't want to pay that yet. We're doing fine with the other ones.
Okay. So I remember hearing somebody say once that this licensing of certain frequencies is a good way of the government sort of steering people to use obviously that frequency. As you said, they get the guarantee of no interference problems, et cetera, et cetera. But it's been alleged by, I don't know whether Mark Steele said this or whether it was Barry Trower, but another campaigner here in the UK. He's down in Cornwall. I don't know if you've heard of Barry Trower. Have you?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. He's a part of the sort of anti-5G movement over here in the UK. But he was talking about 2.4 gigahertz and it being particularly bad for with respect to pregnancy and young women and somehow. And I mean, again, he didn't really offer extensive proof of that. It was a claim that, was apparently backed up by some paper reference at the bottom of an article in his drawer somewhere. So I'm not sure of the credibility. But do you know anything about that? Can you tell us something about that sort of frequency?
I do. I've seen there's a lot of people that have cited different studies on it. Mark loves one in particular. I don't know what in particular Barry's talking about. I haven't seen any conclusive studies or anything about pregnancies in 2.4 gigahertz, but Mark talks about diabetes. And he brought that up with you. He talked about the study that rats had diabetes more, went from 2.4 gigahertz, and he attributed the rise in diabetes globally to 2.4 gigahertz. And he cites this paper. Now, the paper is, radio frequency radiation emitted from Wi-Fi causes impaired insulin secretion and increased oxidative stress in rat pancreatic isolates. That's the name of the paper that he's talking about. I've read the paper. I don't think Mark has. So if I can cover diabetes, there's 2 types. The first type of diabetes, type 1, is typically child onset, and that's where you have an issue where your body attacks your pancreas, and specifically the islets that produce insulin.
Yeah,
it's an autoimmune problem, and so your pancreas cannot produce as much insulin. Type 2 is where you have typically it's dietary. You have had just too much sugar, and your pancreas can produce a lot of insulin, but your body, you get insulin resistivity.
Yeah.
So that particular paper, so Mark attributes the rise in type 2, which is where the rise has happened to what this paper. But when you read the paper shows that not that it's an autoimmune problem, and not that it's an insulin resistance problem, but that it actually slightly impairs the ability of the pancreas to produce insulin, which would be in line with type 1 diabetes, not type 2. So again, he's self-defeated there.
Interesting. Okie dokie. So what's your take really on okay, we've sort of put Mark back in his box effectively, and perhaps we're going to sort of listen to any future things he says with a shade of next to it. Do you think that there is flat no concern about 5G being used in any respect like that? Is it just a communication system? Obviously, we all know this is the internet age, and everyone's looking for more data speed. I've already mentioned my concerns on EMS. I treat them with great respect. I don't use a cell phone a great deal. It's usually in airplane mode, and we don't have Wi-Fi. We wire everything up for better speed, better privacy and connectivity, everything, and less exposure. So what's your take on the whole scene with 5G? Do you have a main come from there, Michael?
I do. So as far as it being anything intentional, there would have to be so many people involved, and somebody would come forward and say, I am the one that designed or had a part in design. It's as silly as the flat earth idea. As far as is it safe? Is there concern? There's always concern. Absolutely. I'll agree. There's always concern with radio frequency range, waves, with microwave transmissions, all that. And the different regulatory bodies have their limits that they've put out that said that this is the safe and allowed limits. I'm always ready to have them review those. And a year ago, the ICNIRP updated their specification, which is for the UK and Europe. The FCC, the United States, the last update was in 1996. It's way overdue. And the Children's Health Fund, I think, the RFK, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., just last week, they had a case where it seems like they're going to have to, the FCC might have to review their stance on it and their science on it. I love that. I think that's a great idea. No problem with that. So what is any problem or challenge with 5G? I am happy to say from everything I've seen, 5G is just as safe as 4G. So if there's any concern, then the concern is the same as 4G and is the same as everything else. 5G didn't have to have the name 5G. It was just an arbitrary thing that the marketers kind of chose to say, well, we want to have a new thing we can sell. So let's release 15 of our specification. Let's call it 5G. That's it. They could have waited another 2 years. They could have chosen to never give it another name again.
Yeah.
So, and nobody would then be saying, let's stop the next revision of the cell phone technology, because they wouldn't even know.
They wouldn't have a name for it, would they, with a label yet?
It helps to have a label if you're going to fight against something, I guess. So if, I don't know, will the marketers declare that 6G is at some particular specification or not? Maybe, or maybe not. And if they don't, then what? Then what is the next? Yeah. Because the people complained about 4G, they complained about 3G. So the real thing and is, what are the safe limits? Yeah. And if there is research and studies that show that there is real harm happening at legal limits, then that needs to be addressed, no doubt.
Well, I think there is evidence for that, frankly. The problem is with all the legal limits is that they all refer to, and we're just talking 4G here, we're talking EMFs in general. Just to tie up what you were saying there, actually, before I go off on that tangent, I think that the whole 5G thing, there is a certain amount of hysteria over its alleged harm and so forth. But I was always been concerned by knowing that there are biological impacts and effects on the body with 4G, with 3G, with sleeping next to a refrigerator, with the microwave oven. That the sort of intensification, if you like, if we sort of carry on up the frequency spectrum and we have more and more devices, we're going to have more and more saturation. So we're going to have more and more, exposure. It never struck me as a good idea anyway, in terms of, undermining human health. But clearly, I think we can all relax about it being a weapon system. But I must just say that I don't trust my government personally. I don't trust my government not to harm me, and I certainly don't think that they're trying to help me. Although that's what they would allege all the time. So I am wary. I have to just say for the record, I'm slightly wary of all of these systems. And as you said, they could be that, the technology could be in place to cause harm, but you've helped dispel the fears around the lampposts, luckily. But yes, so coming back to the whole issue of 5G as just an extension of the Internet of Things, all our white goods and everything in the home, that this idea of having everything wired up, and of course selling it as a good idea. Do you have any concerns about that, Michael? Where do you see that going?
There's a lot of security concerns for sure, because security is hard. I write software primarily, and security is really hard to do. So some third party makes a new camera that you install in your house. Did they do the right things to make sure that nobody can hack it and see your house? Well, that's a great question.
Yeah.
But and I would say a lot of them no.
Yeah.
People have done security audits on them and found, yep, I was able to just get into their website and type in a number and see somebody's house. Okay, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So security, yes. For when it comes to electromagnetic radiation and concerns, well, if somebody is concerned about having it, then don't install it in your house. If you share a house with somebody, you're really close, and they have it just on the other side of a wall, well, there's the problem. You live next to them, they might be noisy at night. You have that kind of a problem whenever you live that close to somebody in general. So I don't know where you live. I'm guessing it might not be super close to other people. Right? So you'd have that advantage.
Yeah.
That it's hard for people, right? If you're going to live in an area, and
it is. If you're in an apartment block, if you're in a city center or an urban environment, it's going to be increasingly difficult to maintain any kind of lifestyle that doesn't involve a high degree of being subject to electromagnetic fields, pulsed microwave, and all these frequencies, which I would say, and I'd reference people to other videos I've done on the issue, that this is something to be very, very cautious about. And the problem is, as I alluded to earlier, it's not an acute harm. It's not something that you can necessarily feel unless you're being subject to some crowd control device. It's the sort of thing that's going to make you age extra fast, which of course you don't notice, but nobody wants that. If you stop to think about that for a moment, nobody wants to get old quicker, and this sort of relatively discreet yet ongoing damage at the cellular level and to mitochondria, I think is something that people would do well to be cautious about. But it's as I said, it's a relief. And it's good to know that there's no danger of acute attack, and of course it does sort of reground us in reality, of course, because like I said, whilst I don't believe my government is my friend, we have to sort of take a deep breath every few minutes, metaphorically speaking, and not sort of get too carried away with scary stories, don't we?
Yeah, it's about motivation too. Why would they want to intentionally harm people? It doesn't, on its face, make sense on it.
Well, true.
You have to have the motivation.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with because your premise there is, if I can't think of a reason, then there isn't one. So personally, I wouldn't be so hasty as to assume there'd never be any reason for the government to wish to make someone go away or stop saying something, so
a person certainly. But if it's happening in general to everybody, they're doing it to themselves as well.
Well, are they? I mean, are they? But I do get your point. I mean, I think if there's any, some people say there's an agenda of depopulation, and there's some credibility to that. But there's plenty of efforts that are succeeding admirably in that endeavour, without the need for 5G as a weapon.
There's
Without the
other
need.
efficient ways to do
Yeah,
that.
with diet and glyphosate and all sorts of things, but the idea of sort of vaporizing people in their front rooms from the streetlights, I'm glad you've allayed our fears on anything to do with that, and indeed pointed out just how crazy it is, and because as I said, it can be easy to sort of jump to conclusions and quickly jump on an interesting idea that sounds credible at first pass. So I really appreciate the fact that you've been able to shed some light on it and bring some of your expertise, to this whole issue, Michael. It's great.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you wanted to add to what we've discussed, Michael? We left anything out?
Maybe one thing that Mark Steele talks about a good deal is he talks about the European Resolution 1815.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a number; it's not the year. That it says that it's 200 millivolts is the most that you can have, and he says that's international law. It's not. I'm not super well versed on EU rules, but I do believe that the UK isn't under the same EU rules anymore as of recently.
Yeah.
But even that, it's just a resolution. It's not an actual law until another country actually makes it into a law. So it's not the law in the UK. It's not against the law to have more than 200 millivolts per meter.
Mm-hmm.
He never gets that.
Yeah.
The law actually is for 868 megahertz. It's around 27 volts per meter, not millivolts, volts per meter. So he's off by a couple factors of 10.
Hey, one last question then. One last question is, what do you think? I mean, where's somebody? I mean, this is maybe a pointless question because we're just guessing, really. But given that somebody is wrong like that, and so radically wrong, what do you think is going on? Is it somebody just being genuinely mistaken? Is it a sort of a crusade that somebody's riding for a little bit of fun and celebrity, but they just haven't quite done their homework? What do you think?
Oh, I think there's two main channels. It could be that he actually believes this stuff, and he is that misled. And that would be the case where he thinks he's an expert, but he's not. And we call that the Dunning-Kruger effect. If you look that up, it's where a perceived expertise that's not there. And I think I think that he is doing it to get money out of people and to profit himself. He doesn't have marketable skills. He spent time in prison. He had it's best I can tell, he was probably a welder in the 80s and early 90s before he went to prison. He got out of prison, and since then he hasn't had a whole lot of success. He had this helmet, this motorcycle helmet he had a part in, and it flopped. So I think that my guess is that he's doing it because it's a way to make money.
Fair play. Well, I mean, I have no vested interest, I hasten to add, in sort of knocking anyone or insulting them, but I do have a vested interest in the truth and knowing what's right and what isn't. So purely on, should we say, on the level of wanting to iron out the mistakes and get our facts straight, that's really where I'm most grateful to you, Michael, for doing that. Not really interested in bashing anyone, quite interested in figuring out the whys and wherefores. But the point is, we've got some facts straightened out, and I'm most grateful to you for doing that, Michael. It's been a massive pleasure.
Yeah, my website is MCToon.net. It's mostly just reference materials for flat Earth stuff. But I do have a 5G page, mctoon.net/5G, that has links. It has frequencies that are in use in different areas of the world, and the FCC and the ICNIRP guidelines are linked on there if you want to look at them.
Well, look, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, Michael. Really appreciate it. And do check out the website, everybody, and check out the links below, which I'll put down there, to Michael's resources. And thank you so much for listening. Remember to check out my website, lawfulrebel.com. There's stacks more on there on finding truth, specific truths, as well as methodology of how to find truth. And do join me again for another episode of Living Outside the Matrix.
Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see.